I was talking, I did a couple interviews with some guys from the organization Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and they had met with Gene Sperling, who's President Obama's chief economic advisor, this week in the White House in anticipation of the State of the Union address. And President Obama is slated to talk about income inequality. We're seeing a broader push for raising the minimum wage. We're seeing a broader push for things like paid sick leave. And these guys walked out of that room convinced that if there was ever an opportunity, even now, to cut Social Security, and look, these guys I'm talking to, these are not, of the metrosexual ilk like you and I. These are not young, creative class types who are emo progs. These are long-time, sort of embedded in the beltway type of guys who said, we don't understand.
And if they leave the beltway, it's generally... Oh, you're talking about the two guys that were meeting with him? Or
Yes. These are not outside... I mean, these are, groups that have been well ensconced in the Democratic establishment. And they both said, we came out of that meeting, and it was quite clear that if they have the opportunity to engage in a grand bargain, that they will cut Social Security if they can. That the only thing that is keeping us from... cutting Social Security is Republican intransigence, because there would have to be some request for raised revenue. And they said, we can't understand it. Now, I don't know if they can't understand it or they just don't feel comfortable, alienating anybody. But, it's clear this is just an agenda item for the administration. There's no policy behind it. There's nothing but just an incredible desire for it. And so...
it's a legacy piece, even though I think it wouldn't end up, income inequality keeps going the same way it does, and if they were to do that to Social Security and pass the trade deal and some of the other things that exacerbated it, I think, you'll be remembered a little bit like Hoover, quite frankly, as opposed to like you'd want to be remembered for this period of time.
No, I'm not even sure that's true. I mean, I think from a policy standpoint, in their calculation, I mean, look, the idea that you would cut Social Security and talk about income equality is just absurd. But, we've talked about why I think it's they perceive it to be in their best interest in terms of their legacy. But it is just stunning. And it really, I don't know. Did you read that David Remnick piece on Obama in the New Yorker?
I've seen some excerpts so far. I haven't read the whole thing, though, no.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it strikes me as there's just like, how can they are playing, and they still continue to play, too. It's quite clear to me that the legacy was built about, that they perceive the legacy will be that President Obama tried to reason with the Republicans. And that is enough for them. I mean, I think, that the president and his advisors feel that they have a responsibility to a legacy that is involved with the fact that that he's the first African American president, and that they can damage that rather than enhance it in some ways by pushing through anything that the establishment perceives as ideological. I don't necessarily agree with that perspective, obviously, but I think that's the way that they feel. I think that's been their strategy since day one.
Yeah, I've said, and because I've had people who've come down on all sides of, or at least a few different sides of what, animates the president. And I think it's been a combination of stuff that he really believes, which to me is a clear example of the Social Security, for example, and other things where he thinks that everyone getting along and working things out together is more important than getting the right policy, even if that means fighting for it. Which leads to the part two, which I think is another part of him, which is even the things he does think are right, he's not willing to fight for. You know what I mean? Right. Even his economic instincts that are good, like raising the minimum wage and other things. I mean, he'll mention it in his speech. What he'll do about it or to get it done, and frankly, it doesn't matter with that House that we have to deal with. But he had his opportunity to do these things, and we saw what was done and what wasn't done. So I mean, I don't, I'm nonplussed by anything he does anymore, because I think he's bought into a lot of the neoliberal conventional DC doctrine. Free trade is good. Don't just ignore the consequences to vast swaths of the country that have turned into literally ghost towns and cities. Social Security, we spend too much money, but let's go after Social Security as part of it, because it should be shared pain, even though a defense contractor losing money versus somebody in Social Security is not shared pain. It is not even a comparison. These are doctrinal beliefs of his, and they're wrong and they're counterproductive. But the problem is that there are those, and then there are the ones where he frankly has better instincts, but he refuses to fight for them. And so, what do we get in the end? A few good things. Well, a few good things here and there that I'm proud of him for, that I'm glad he did, and a whole lot of the rest of his agenda that has been not nearly as effective as it should have been.
Well, and we'll certainly have a sense in the coming weeks after the State of the Union to see, where the administration is headed on this and how much help they're going to give the Democrats, at least in maintaining the status quo with their retention of the Senate. And you mentioned the TPP, and I had an interview, did an interview with Ethan Rome, who is the exiting director of Healthcare Action Network, I think it is, and he had a great illustration of what the TPP will do. I don't want to step on the interview that I'm going to play later with him, but it deserves multiple mentions. But he just said, for example, just to get a sense, we've all heard the stories about how the regulatory structure of the TPP would create, sort of trump the sovereignty of nations in favor of corporate profit projections. And we've seen examples of it in in NAFTA, where a logging company heading up to Canada sues Canada for $900 million because they won't open up a certain forest that is not, they don't have access to for their logging. And his example was that any attempt, if we get to the point where we can say we get lawmakers to statutorily require and allow, for that matter, Medicare, let's say, in Medicare D, to bargain and negotiate for lower drug prices by volume, which they cannot do now under Medicare D, that theoretically the pharmaceutical industry under the TPP could sue the U.S. government in this corporate tribunal for either compensation, essentially to say, you can't do that because that diminishes our profits. And that's the structure of the TPP, that it would strip sovereignty. It would allow, you could not have government savings on those type of things because it steps on the profits of pharmaceutical industries. And so that was just, I thought, a great illustration, and that's why I wanted to raise it. And you'd said TPP, and that's what it made me think of. But
and again, how on one hand you say you're fighting to help lessen the unbelievable income inequality situation we have, which is clearly the worst in about 100 years. Nothing bad happened back then, by the way, when we had a similar situation, so don't worry. And how you can say that on one hand, and then be wanting this thing on the other hand. it doesn't intellectually follow. And that's maybe the problem is I don't think his whole philosophy intellectually follows. I just think it's sort of a mishmash of kind of, as you said, you called Social Security thing just an agenda item. It's not part of a broader policy broader set of policy goals that all lead to one thing. You know what I mean? And I think really that's the problem we have here.